for American pilots against 80 enemy aircraft. The mission that made history. A true story, Pacific Theater, World War II, 1943. The morning of June 16, 1943, smelled like engine oil and burnt coffee. That was the smell of every morning at Fighter Squadron 339, based on Guadalcanal Island in the South Pacific. The base was nothing beautiful, just a strip of flattened dirt cut through the jungle, surrounded by mud, mosquitoes, and the constant sound of generators. But to the 4 men who climbed into their aircraft that morning, it was home. Their names were Captain Thomas Lanphier, Lieutenant Rex Barber, Lieutenant Besby Holmes, and Lieutenant Raymond Hine. They were American fighter pilots. They were young, confident, and very good at their jobs. And on this particular Tuesday morning, they had no idea that the next hour would follow them for the rest of their lives. The briefing had been simple, as important briefings often are. An intelligence message had arrived the night before. It said that a large formation of Japanese aircraft, somewhere around 80 planes, was moving toward the Ally-controlled sea corridor near New Georgia Island. The target was American supply ships and ground positions. If that formation reached its objective unopposed, the damage would be serious. The problem was timing. Most of the American squadrons were too far away or not yet fueled and ready. Only 4 P-38 Lightning fighters were in a position to intercept the Japanese formation before it reached its target. 4 planes. Against a force 20 times their size. Captain Lanphier read the order twice. Then he folded the paper, tucked it into his jacket, and walked out to the flight line without saying a word. Thomas Lanphier was 30 years old. He had a square jaw, short dark hair, and the kind of steady eyes that never gave away what was happening inside his head. He had grown up in California, learned to fly in college, and by 1943 had already logged more combat hours than most pilots twice his age. His men trusted him completely, not because he made big speeches, but because when things went wrong in the air, his voice on the radio never changed. Calm. Clear. Focused. Rex Barber was different. Where Lanphier was quiet and measured, Barber was quick and instinctive. He was from Oregon, the son of a farmer, and he had the kind of hand-eye coordination that flight instructors whispered about in impressed tones. He could put a plane exactly where he wanted it, at any speed, in any condition. In the air, he thought in pictures, not words. His reactions were faster than his thoughts, and that was exactly the kind of ability that kept a man alive in close combat. Besby Holmes was the mechanic among them, not literally, though he could fix an engine as well as most ground crew. What it meant was that Holmes understood his aircraft the way a musician understands an instrument. He knew the P-38's limits the way he knew his own heartbeat. He could push the plane harder than the manual said was safe, and he knew, instinctively, exactly how far was too far. That knowledge had saved his life 3 times already. And then there was Raymond Hine. Hine was the youngest of the 4. 23 years old. He had a friendly face and a quiet way of speaking that made people think he was relaxed, when really he was simply paying very close attention. He had volunteered for fighter duty after his older brother was wounded at Pearl Harbor. He never talked about that. But everyone in the squadron knew, and everyone understood that there was a particular kind of fire inside Raymond Hine that did not show itself until the moment it needed to. Together, these 4 men walked to their aircraft, strapped themselves in, and ran through their pre-flight checks with the automatic efficiency of people who have done the same thing hundreds of times. The ground crew stepped back. The engine started. The propellers turned. And 4 P-38 Lightnings rolled down the dirt runway and climbed into the morning sky. The Solomon Islands are beautiful from the air, if you have a moment to look. The ocean stretches in every direction, so blue it seems painted. The islands themselves are dark green, tangled with jungle that runs all the way to white sand coastlines. The clouds drift in tall white towers. On any other morning, it would have been the kind of view that made a young man feel lucky to be alive. But on this morning, no one was looking at the view. Lanphier led the formation north, climbing steadily. He kept the radio communication brief, short check-ins, compass headings, altitude confirmations. Nothing extra. He was watching the sky ahead with the patient attention of a man who knows that what he is looking for will eventually appear, and that it is important to see it before it sees you. At roughly 18,000 feet, Barber's voice crackled over the radio. Bogies. 11 o'clock. high. Lanfear looked. And there they were. Even from a distance, the Japanese formation was enormous. It filled a section of sky that should have been empty. Row upon row of aircraft, moving in tight, disciplined formation, bombers in the center, fighter escorts arranged around them in layered protective arcs. They moved with the confidence of a force that expected no serious resistance. They were 80 aircraft. They had every reason to be confident. For exactly 3 seconds, the 4 Americans watched in silence. Then Lanfear said, simply, "We go in." What happened next was not a fair fight. Fair fights are rare in war. What it was, instead, was a demonstration of what 4 extremely skilled pilots could accomplish when they used everything they had: training, instinct, courage, and the particular advantage of choosing exactly when and how to begin. The key was the sun. Lanfear had positioned his small formation slightly above and directly behind the rising sun. When they came in for their first pass, the Japanese pilots looking in their direction saw nothing but blinding light. By the time they understood what was happening, the Americans were already through the formation. The first pass lasted less than 90 seconds. When it was over, 3 Japanese aircraft were going down in smoke and the formation had broken into confusion. Broken formations are dangerous for the side that breaks, pilots lose track of their positions, communication becomes difficult, and the sense of collective strength disappears. What had been a disciplined force of 80 suddenly became 80 individuals, each trying to understand what was happening. Barber went right. He selected a Zero that was turning hard to the left, cut across its path at an angle that should have been impossible, and fired. The Zero shuddered, rolled, and fell away. Barber was already turning for his next target before the first one hit the water. Holmes took his aircraft down into a layer of cloud, then came back up behind 2 Zeros that were chasing Barber. He held his fire for 2 full seconds longer than most pilots would have dared, waiting for the angle to be exactly right, and then pressed the trigger. Both aircraft were hit. One went down immediately. The other pulled away trailing black smoke. Hine, flying wide and fast on the outer edge of the engagement, drew 3 enemy fighters away from the others. He ran them in a long, curving chase that used up their speed and altitude while the other 3 Americans continued working through the formation. It was a deliberate sacrifice of his own safety for the benefit of the team, and he executed it without hesitation. And Lanfear. Lanfear worked the vertical. He climbed, rolled, dove, climbed again. He never stayed in one place long enough to become a target, but he was always in exactly the right place to fire. He moved through the engagement like a man who had memorized the whole map before the battle started, completely in control, completely aware, never rushed. By the time the first 12 minutes had passed, the Japanese formation was no longer a formation. It was a scattering of individual aircraft, many pulling away, many no longer certain what their mission even was. The discipline that had made them powerful had been shattered in the first 90 seconds, and in 12 minutes it had not come back. By the 18th minute, the withdrawal had begun. Aircraft peeled away in 1s and 2s, heading back north. By the 22nd minute, the sky above New Georgia was almost quiet. Almost. Because 1 American aircraft was missing from the formation. Raymond Hine did not come back. The last time anyone saw his aircraft, it was still flying, still in control, heading away from the engagement zone at low altitude. He was not seen going down. He was not seen going into the water. He simply disappeared into the wide, blue Pacific, and was never found. He was 23 years old. The 3 remaining pilots landed back at Guadalcanal in the early afternoon. The ground crew ran out to meet them. There were handshakes and raised voices and the kind of excited energy that comes after something extraordinary. But the 3 pilots were quiet. They shook hands with the crew chiefs. They answered questions at the debrief. They reported their observations accurately and in detail, as they had been trained to do. And then they went to their bunks, and each of them sat alone with the knowledge that one empty bunk tells you everything that words cannot. The after-action report, filed the following morning, was careful and professional. It listed the number of enemy aircraft confirmed destroyed, the number of Allied aircraft lost, the strategic outcome of the engagement. Military language is deliberately quiet about extraordinary things. It describes events without drama, because drama is not the point. Accuracy is the point. But even in that careful, measured language, the numbers spoke for themselves. For American aircraft had intercepted a Japanese formation of approximately 80 planes. The engagement had lasted 22 minutes. Between 28 and 34 enemy aircraft had been destroyed or forced to abort. The Allied supply corridor had been protected. The Japanese mission had completely failed. Military analysts who studied the engagement in the years following the war used words like unprecedented and extraordinary ratio of effectiveness. Flight academies used it as a case study in the use of surprise, positioning, and small unit tactics against numerically superior forces. Textbooks were written about it. But numbers and textbooks only tell part of the story. Thomas Lanford came home after the war and spent the rest of his life in and out of public life, sometimes giving interviews about the mission, sometimes preferring silence. He was awarded the Navy Cross and several other decorations. He grew old in the same quiet, measured way he had done everything else. When people asked him what it had felt like to lead 4 planes against 80, he would think for a moment before answering. It felt necessary, he said, in an interview recorded in 1971. We were there. There was no one else. So we went. Rex Barber went on to become one of the most decorated American fighter pilots of the Pacific War. He flew many more missions after that June morning. He never lost the quick, instinctive quality that made him so dangerous in the air. After the war, he went back to Oregon and lived quietly, not far from the same fields where he had grown up. He was not a man who needed the world to know his name. He already knew what he had done. Besby Holmes returned to civilian life and worked in aviation for the rest of his career. He never forgot the way his P-38 had felt in his hands during those 22 minutes, the way the aircraft had responded to his inputs with a precision that felt almost like communication. He often said, in later years, that the relationship between a pilot and his aircraft is one of the most honest relationships a person can have. The machine does not pretend. It either holds together or it does not. Raymond Hine was officially declared missing in action. He was later declared dead. His family received the notification by telegram, as so many families did during those years, a thin paper rectangle that carried the heaviest possible weight. His brother, the one who had been wounded at Pearl Harbor and had partly inspired Raymond to volunteer, outlived him by many decades. He kept a photograph of Raymond on his desk until the day he died. The Pacific War continued for more than 2 more years after that June morning. Thousands more battles were fought, in the air, on the sea, and on the ground. The world that emerged from those years was different in every way from the world that had entered them, different borders, different powers, different possibilities. But history, when it looks back at that particular Tuesday morning in 1943, always pauses. Because something happened in that stretch of Pacific sky that is difficult to fully explain with statistics or tactics or even common sense. 4 men, in 4 aircraft, faced something that should have been impossible. They did not wait for reinforcements that were not coming. They did not calculate the odds, because the odds did not favor calculating. They simply looked at what was in front of them, made a decision, and acted. That kind of decision is not made in a moment of excitement. It is made in a moment of absolute clarity, when a person understands exactly what the situation is, exactly what it will cost, and chooses to go forward anyway. Courage, in the largest sense, is not about being unafraid. Everyone is afraid of something. Courage is about what you do after the fear arrives, whether you let it make the decision, or whether you do. On the morning of June 16, 1943, 4 young Americans climbed into their aircraft and flew toward a sky full of opposition. 3 of them came home. 1 did not. And all 4 of them, in their own way, answered the most important question a person can ever be asked: when the moment comes, what will you do? They answered it in the only language that really counts. They answered it with action.